Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. Last October, it appeared that the radical India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, IMEC for short, was shelved. Hamas's horrific attack on Israeli civilians triggered off a war in West Asia that continues till date. Now, 6 months later, there's hope for the corridor. India and the UAE have begun work on the first stage of the IMEC. The first senior level official meeting is likely to take place on the 15th of May. Now, this meeting will work to establish the protocols so that goods and containers once cleared at the Indian port of Mundra are not reopened at UAE's Fujairah port, and they're allowed to proceed to the final destinations in Europe or America. That's good news for IMEC. Now, IMEC will also be discussed when US NSA Jake Sullivan visits India for the iCET meeting with his Indian counterpart Ajit Doval later this month. Now, the IMEC was conceived by Prime Minister Modi and President Mohammed bin Zayed, with US and the Saudi Arabians joining in. It was during the G20 Delhi summit that the MOU was signed. Will IMEC finally take off now, and will this boost economic development in the region? Will the corridor be successful in laying cables for electricity and digital connectivity, as well as pipe clean hydrogen and exports along the railway routes? Joining me to discuss this today are Ambassador Navdeep Suri and my colleague R. Sridharan, who's International and Group Editor, Business and Economy of News9. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. Ambassador Suri, you've just authored a very detailed report on the IMEC. If I may say so, it's spoken of a lot of green shoots for the IMEC 6 months after the attacks, where we thought that it was going to be shelved for a long time. When do you see the first containers actually moving along the IMEC corridor?
I think that's several years away, Sandeep. This is, I think it's important to separate the vision, the concept from the actual implementation and execution on the ground. And we can discuss each of those. But let's talk about the vision first, right? The vision is to connect India, the Middle East, and Europe through a corridor that will have an eastern leg, which starts from India's west coast and goes to points in the Gulf. It could be Fujairah, it could be Jebel Ali, it could be ports in Saudi Arabia. And from there on, a rail network that takes the material, the goods, across to Haifa in Israel, and then on a ship to any port in southern Europe for the western leg of the corridor. Then say from Piraeus in Greece, you can then take on Europe's rail network those containers to any point in Denmark or Sweden or France or Germany. And that's only the goods dimension, right? And as you mentioned, there are 3 other dimensions on it, which are really quite futuristic. There's the digital corridor, along with the goods corridor, and that is predicated on the need for having secure, high-speed data connections, which link our countries, and the obvious but unspoken need to counter China's dominance on submarine cables that we are witnessing. The third dimension, which I think we are actually seeing work happen on that much faster than on the others, is renewable energy grid connectivity. This has a lot of potential. India and UAE are already in talks for connecting the electricity grids for renewable energy, and discussions have also started with Saudi Arabia. And there's a lot of potential as part of India's International Solar Alliance, as part of our One Sun, One Word, One Grid proposal, to see whether you can really have renewable energy grids interconnected so that you obviate the need for expensive battery storage system and essentially follow the path of the sun. And the fourth, which is perhaps the most futuristic of all of these, is the green hydrogen connectivity, because while green hydrogen is clearly the fashion of the day, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of actually transporting green hydrogen across pipelines, whether you convert it as ammonia or take it in some other format. So what I'm saying is, this is a visionary project.
Right.
It's good for the planet, it's good for climate, and it creates supply chain resilience for us. It reduces our dependence on the Suez Canal, has a lot of positives for us at a geoeconomic level. But there are a whole bunch of issues, even if October 7 had not happened.
Yes. Yes.
It is very carefully. There are a whole bunch of issues that need to be tackled. Those range from standardization and harmonization of your tracks, of your containers, harmonization of customs processes so that goods can travel seamlessly across national borders, and you're talking about several national borders. All of that work that Europe has done so diligently over the last 3 decades or more, in terms of that movement of goods and services seamlessly across Europe. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and we haven't even come to who funds it. Right? So what I want to say is, even if October 7 hadn't happened, this project would have taken years to come to fruition.
Right.
And I think we need to keep that in the back of our minds as we look at the impact of October 7. Yes, today the Middle East is in a place where there is no mood for this kind of ambitious connectivity that involves Europe. But people who are, that might be the mood on the street or in the media, but people who are actively engaged with the project realize that this is a longer term project. And hopefully in the next year, 2 years, things will fall into place. So we must continue to work on the longer term vision and not get completely taken over by the post-October 7 scenario.
Absolutely. And, thanks for summing that up so beautifully, Ambassador Suri. Sri, this point that Ambassador Suri made, that it's actually about the long-term vision. And that possibly explains all the meetings that we are seeing now with between India and the UAE and India and the US and all the key stakeholders in this. They're saying that, look, we think that the trouble in Gaza, as unfortunate as it seems to be for the short term, we are planning for the long term, 5, 6, 7 years when the project is actually likely to take off. Tell us why it's so important for India to be a key part of such corridors like this. The IMEC, when it was unveiled last year in Delhi, I think most of us were taken completely by surprise. No one had anticipated. But what's the key thing for the Indian economy? Why is it so important for the India growth story?
Absolutely, Sandeep, because if you look at what this project really is doing at a fundamental level, it's bringing 2 continents closer. The European continent with the Asian continent. And what is the difference between these 2 continents? Asia is still underdeveloped, especially India. We have a lot of talent pool, but it's still a growing economy, a poor economy compared to the wealthy European economies and even the Middle East economies. So there is a balance of resources that can now happen. We have the resources and Europe offers you the market access. Right. So even for European companies' perspective, where the aging population is a challenge, they can tap into the labor pool of, this part of the world. So it's a wonderful idea. No doubt about it. In fact, if you remember, President Joe Biden called it a real big deal when he came and he flew all the way from US to be at the sidelights of the G20 summit and make that statement. So we know that it's a grand plan. But as Ambassador Suri also hinted, Sandeep, the risk with anything like this, with something as complicated as this, it's not just a question of multiple countries being involved in it, but countries which until recently, were actually not even on talking terms. They came together to say, yes, we're going to do this, and now we have this sudden fracture in the Middle East because of the situation between Israel and Hamas. And the rest of the players, obviously, in the region. So all it's going to take to disrupt this project once again is for one of the governments involved to lose interest in it. It's as simple as that, because you need all the pieces to move perfectly in synchronization. And like Ambassador Suri said, this is a long-term project. It's not going to happen over the next 2 years, 3 years. In fact, even to do a detailed project report will take multiple years. And then you start talking of actual implementation. Then there are challenges of raising finance for it. Ambassador Suri hinted about, that we need to harmonize trade regulations. We need standards standards to be harmonized. There are so many challenges, that are there, and to overcome all of them one by one, it's going to take time.
It's going to take time indeed. And, speaking of time, Ambassador Suri, you've also mentioned this other project there, which is also back in favor, the INSTC, connecting India to Europe via Iran and Russia. It's if I could use it, a bypass corridor. Now that's come back into favor, obviously, because Russia is cut out of the West because of the war. But this is another project, the INSTC, which we've been hearing of for a very long time, almost 20 years, and that didn't really take off. Do you see this as being, a plan B for India, that look, this corridor might bypass Iran and the Russian Federation, but here we have another corridor to reach Europe, and may the two corridors work in parallel. How do you see INSTC versus IMEC?
Look, Sandeep, the big picture on this is India's trade is going to continue to grow significantly over the coming decades. We are still a fairly small percentage of global trade. India's two fastest growing markets, largest markets, are Europe and the US. And trade with the Middle East continues to grow very rapidly. What have we seen in the last 2 years? What we saw was one solitary ship blocking the Suez Canal for a week and bringing international trade to a grinding halt, right? 30% of the world's container traffic, 30% passes through the Suez Canal. If we needed a reminder on its criticality, the Houthis have proved it through their attacks on shipping. 5 of the world's largest shipping companies have said it's too risky through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. And so they are taking the ancient Cape of Good Hope route, which adds 6,000 kilometers to a typical journey and adds close to $1 million in shipping costs.
Right.
For us, post-COVID, during COVID, we started talking increasingly about supply chain resilience.
Right.
Today, if we want resilience, I think we want several corridors, so that we are not at the mercy of one, we are not at the mercy of either a broken ship in the Suez or of non-state actors like the Houthis, who can literally hold the global economy to ransom.
Yes.
And so as far as I am concerned, I see zero contradiction between the Chabahar corridor, INSTC, or the IMEC. I think, whichever comes through, there's going to be enough growth in trade happening over the next couple of decades to justify their viability. I think the only point I will make is, when you're building this kind of resilience, you also need to plan for a degree of redundancy. And I think having more than one corridor in addition to the Suez Canal will provide that resilience because of the redundancy. And mind you, it's not just India which is in the game. You also have Iraq and Turkey in particular, very exercised by the fact that it's left out of IMEC, because Turkey's always seen itself as the natural bridge between Europe and Asia. And it argues that probably if the ships were to come from the west coast to Basra and get on a road come rail link through Turkey to the Mediterranean, that might be a more efficient way. So there are several games in town at this point of time, linking Europe with Asia. And I think, from a business point of view, it'll be good to have a somewhat more competitive environment as opposed to the monopoly that the Suez Canal currently enjoys.
Right, absolutely. Multiple redundancies there, Sri, as Ambassador Suri was mentioning. And do you think India's the right country to, bet on multiple horses, given the fact that we are literally friends with everyone? We have no enemies anywhere in West Asia, apart from the 2 countries we share geographical boundaries with, and those are locked. But how does India's placement in the world today, where we are friends with both of these rival blocs, how does that help these multiple corridors?
I would go to the extent that if we are seeing acceptance for an idea like IMEC and the fact that now people are actually at the negotiating table looking at how do we make it work. I think it's largely because of India's leadership and Prime Minister Modi's leadership and the goodwill and the equity which he enjoys with a wide variety of countries on different ends of the spectrum. So I think that's the ability which our leadership has demonstrated, that this is a project, this is a dream which is worthy for every country involved in it to follow, to see to come to fruition. Don't forget that the countries involved represent almost half of the world GDP. About $105 trillion is the world GDP, and these countries which are participating in this are almost $45 trillion put together. So it's half of the world in terms of economic size coming together to do a project. Yes, we will see some resistance from countries like Egypt. Suez Canal
which
is there.
Absolutely.
I mean, they have the most to lose if an alternative corridor gets built up. But that's what I was saying, that on a political risk to this project is probably the highest. I think we can still overcome the economic hurdles like mobilizing money for it. I think if you have a good, compelling story, a proposition, I don't see why even private investors won't want to be part of this. So I think the easiest disruption that can come from is the political disruption to this whole project.
Absolutely. Important point there, Ambassador Suri. And how do you, as Sri was mentioning, how do you de-risk this project from these political uncertainties?
I think, look, firstly, if you look at the last couple of months, President Macron was our chief guest on Republic Day, and he announced that he's appointing a special envoy for IMEC. Prime Minister Modi was in Abu Dhabi in February, and in the joint statement, there's a renewed commitment to energize the corridor. So despite whatever is happening in the region, you see these reiterations of commitment to the project. I think the de-risking partly is to see it as a bundle. If it were only a trade corridor, then yes, you would have larger issues at stake of trade disruption, etc. But if you look at an integrated corridor, which also brings in the digital connectivity, which also brings in potentially from an Indian perspective, UPI connectivity for e-commerce and other transactions, if you bring in the grid connectivity, then I think each of these will kind of reinforce the economics of the other. So what may have been a politically and economically risky project if it were standalone, probably gets somewhat de-risked when you have all of these players involved. And I think the fact that you've got US rock solid behind it, and that I don't expect that to change if Trump comes into power tomorrow. It might be one of the few things that actually holds, because it's the kind of thing that emanates from the Abraham Accords and the I2U2, which made it possible. You have, at the G20, while you mentioned the 4 countries, I think it was significant that the European Union president and the leaders from Italy, Germany, and France were also present on the table to sign off on the corridor. And from this region, you've got India obviously as a critical player, but you've also got Saudis and Emiratis, who are the 2 heaviest hitters in the region on board. That's a lot of firepower, both in economic and in political terms. So the point that I made in the paper is really what you're talking about is continued political will. And you will need large doses of that for a sustained period of time to really see it through. To me, that's important, because often in democracies in particular, attention spans can get limited. And if we retain that focus, that this is a long-term project, if the NSAs of the respective countries continue to drive it, I think there is a reasonable chance that you will continue to see progress in the coming months and years.
Absolutely reasonable.
Just to add to Ambassador Suri's points, actually, in terms of the intention of at least two very critical, countries in doing business with India, there's no doubt about it, Sandeep.
The
For
EU
example,
and the US.
Absolutely, and also I think closer home, Saudi Arabia and UAE.
Right.
Saudi is talking of investing about $100 billion over a period of time in India. UAE is talking about investing $75 billion.
Right.
So these are not small sums, these are massive figures.
Right.
So it shows their confidence in the Indian economy and that India is the right partner for them also. They see a lot of synergies for growing together. It's not about just one economy growing. It's mutual, growth that comes from this kind of a thing. The proposition that Ambassador Suri is also hinting at. It's not just politics, but it's compelling economics at work.
Absolutely.
Which should keep this together.
It should keep it together, and as he mentioned also that the bundling of this that will make it more attractive for the stakeholders, and the fact that if there's a saying for this IMEC corridor, if they should give it a buzzword, it should actually be 7 words. Now is not the time for war. Sri, but thank you very much, Ambassador Suri, for joining us this evening. My colleague R. Sridharan, to talk about the IMEC, the game-changing economic corridor, which is more than just economics. It makes good business sense, and it's actually a peace corridor as well. IMEC back on track. Good news for us here, even as we're dealing with one of the most unprecedented wars in West Asia. Thanks for watching. 40 years ago, the Indian Army launched Operation Meghdoot. Indian Army soldiers occupied the Saltoro Ridge near the Siachen Glacier. That was on the 13th of April, 1984. Now, this was the first operation of its kind in the world. It was fought on the Siachen Glacier. It's the highest altitude battleground in the world. It's been the site of frequent clashes between India and Pakistan. However, more soldiers have died in Siachen from harsh weather conditions than from enemy firing due to frostbite, avalanches and other complications. Guarding Siachen Glacier is key to preserving India's territorial integrity, but it comes with a lot of challenges. What is the cost of patrolling Siachen? Why is it so important? What does it take India to maintain this point? It's an absolute honor for me today to welcome to the studio General Sanjay Kulkarni. He was a captain during Operation Meghdoot. General Kulkarni, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you very much indeed.
I'm also joined by Nitin Gokhale, author and one of South Asia's leading strategic analysts. Mr. Gokhale, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Hi, Sandeep. Thank you for this opportunity. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yes, and last and not the least, Anthony Rosario, who's just back from Siachen. He's the producer of a documentary on Siachen, which talks about India's two-front challenge there, among other things. This was a documentary he put together with Aditya Raj Kaul on Siachen, and he spent a day there. He spent a lot of time in the northern frontier, but we're going to talk about why Siachen matters today. But before we start, General Kulkarni, I want to start by reading out your Kirti Chakra citation. Always gives me goosebumps. I want to start by reading this. It says, Captain Sanjay Kulkarni of the Kumaon Regiment was detailed to lead a task force in a forward location in J&K. Despite the very high altitude, extreme cold, heavy snow, high velocity winds and blizzard conditions, he accomplished his mission successfully. I like how the army makes the most superhuman of tasks so anodyne, that this is just another mission, another day at work for Captain Sanjay Kulkarni, now of course General Kulkarni. But tell us, sir, what it was like 40 years ago, this time in one of the toughest, not one of the toughest battleground in the world.
Sandeep, at the very outset, I must tell you that everything was shrouded in mystery.
Yes.
And that is why you can't really make out from the citation for Shaurya
It doesn't say where and what.
Absolutely. And for many years, we never spoke about it. And very few actually we interacted with.
Right.
And one of them was Nitin Gokhale,
Yes.
with whom we interacted, and he wrote his book Beyond NGA 9842.
Right.
But at that point of time, to be honest, Sandeep, I didn't know, or we didn't know, that it is going to be the highest battlefield, like it's going to be a tough thing or something like that. We took it as, well, it's a task which we must do, and that was it. And most of us, and I had seen the glacier in 1982.
Yes.
There was a reconnaissance, so I used to keep going there. 83, I was part of Polar Bear 1. Then in 84, of course.
Polar Bear was a recce mission.
Polar Bear was a, what they call it as LRP, long range patrolling.
Right.
And that is the one that actually triggered everything, because the Pakistanis subsequently did decide to follow after we had de-inducted from the glacier. And it is then that things became a little more serious, because once the Pakis came on top, they found it extremely difficult to sustain themselves.
Right.
And to the beginning of this initial Musharraf, who writes so in his book, In the Line of Fire, that he, as a colonel, he was a part of the MO of the military operations branch, and he knew what was going on. How their co-commander, General Dahat Khan, was keen that the operations, because of the way the troops had reacted in 83, it couldn't be launched early 84. And so was the Pir Daat Khan, their northern commander, who said, no, our troops will die. And from March, they shifted the date to May, the 1st of May. Now, I'm sure maybe at the highest level they were aware of it, but we decided to choose.
We preempted them.
Yeah, we totally. And this word that you used, Sandeep, preempted them. This is the word that Musharraf also uses in his book, that India preempted, indicating that had we not gone and occupied the Saltoro Ridge, they were all set to come and occupy. So that's something we really need to be worried about, and we noticed it. As soon as you occupied, within no time they were all there. So that's indicative that they were already somewhere close by, and that is something that this preempting them and occupying the Saltoro Ridge line and getting adequate information of it in how the earlier expeditions sponsored by Pakistan through
the mountaineering expeditions,
how would they be coming in? So all that was aware. How Vikram Sood was part of RAW, informed the co-commander General Hoon that this is what was going on. The army headquarters, then Colonel Kumar, Bul Kumar was aware of what is going on. So there was a lot of information. We also had done a lot of reconnaissance plus long range patrol. So it was not, and I would say that if I am sitting here, it's all the troops have done it. I should not at all take credit. That is why even though the citation may read like that, it's just that somebody had to be made to be given something, and I happened to be there. It's nothing.
Typical, spoken with the typical humility of an Indian Army officer, General Kulkarni.
Sandeep, let me be honest, our men are fantastic. Unparalleled. So superb. What courage.
And to be deployed for 4 decades at this altitude, 20,000 feet. I mean, it's like literally fighting on the surface of the moon. That's what some Western commentators have said, that, this is a mission impossible from the get-go. But Nitin, you're the author of possibly the most definitive book on the Siachen operation, beyond NJ 9842. Why is Siachen important 4 decades on? Why is it even more important today? And that's in fact the topic of our discussion today. Why does it still matter so much?
Well, I think it mattered then, it matters now, Sandeep, because it is a wedge between the Chinese on the east of the Siachen Glacier, if you look at the map, and the Pakistanis on the west of the Siachen Glacier or west of the Saltoro Ridge. Because you have the Siachen presence, or the Indian Army has the Siachen presence, actually prevents a handshake between the Chinese and the Pakistanis over the heads of Indians in Ladakh, and prevents them from colluding against India in that sector or in that harsh terrain. I think Siachen's importance has increased manifold since Operation Meghdut in 1984. And therefore, India's presence at that height, in those altitudes, even in these harsh weather conditions, is extremely important even today.
India's presence is very important there. And Anthony, you just returned from Siachen. Tell us how, you're a hiker yourself. You've climbed a few mountains, though not the major ones, but you're not an ordinary civilian. That's what I meant to say. How adverse was the terrain when you went there, and the shooting conditions over there when you put this documentary together with Aditya for us? Just give us an idea of the lay of the land.
I think it is said that once you arrive in Ladakh, because you mostly take a flight, you need a day or two to acclimatize in Leh. But I think I would I would modify that advisory and say I think you need a couple of hours at Siachen, because the moment we landed at Siachen, my brain stopped working for the last, as far as I remember, 15 minutes. I couldn't operate. I had to shoot segments, and I was like, oh, what's happening? I'm not able to make any sense of it. But nevertheless, I think we caught on, my crew caught on, and we started. Of course, it's very cold, Sandeep. It's not just cold. It's not just the cold that hits you. It's also the oxygen, right? By some accounts, 10% of what we breathe in the planes. So imagine the cold, the height, and then the oxygen. So for us, we were just there for 1 day and maybe a little more than 1 day. But for troops who are posted there, some of them for more than 3 months, almost 4 months, it's very difficult. I can't imagine how difficult it must be to sustain. And we were only at the base camp, Sandeep. And there are posts as high as 21,000 and above. So one only wonders what it's like. Of course, we've not been to a forward post, but it must be even more difficult. Of course, the terrain is very rough. If you are to, I mean, you can't stay outdoors for a very long period of time. You constantly have to come indoors. And then, of course, water, the amount of water you have to drink there. And imagine if you're drinking that amount of water, you have to go on so many bio breaks. So it's a combination of several factors challenging. It's not meant for human habitation, but yet the Indian Army, 40 years on, thanks to you, sir, and your men.
Absolutely. The Indian Army going where no man has gone before, General Kulkarni. But you know, when you led that fantastic, heroic operation, Meghdoot, 40 years ago, you were looking at just one front, Pakistan and the line of control. And 4 years ago, China has kind of mobilized in Ladakh, and now today the Indian Army is facing 2 hostile nuclear-armed adversaries. How have things changed? How does our presence on Siachen matter even more now, as Nitin was saying?
Sandeep, to what Anthony just said, I would say, there's a saying in Ladakhi, don't be a Gama in the land of Lama. It's very essential that you must acclimatize.
The references to Gama, Pelwa.
It's very important, because everybody thinks that, well, to begin with, it might sound very good, but it's not so easy. Easy because not at all easy. You can't breathe properly, you can't sleep, you can't eat. You have severe headache, like he said, for about 15 minutes, he was totally blanked. He didn't know what was happening. So there are a lot of things. You get frostbite, chill plains, high altitude, a lot of people losing their limbs. So it's very difficult to survive. And on top of it, minus 50 degrees, minus 70 degrees, blizzardous weather. So all of it is there.
Nothing has changed. The weather hasn't changed in
nothing,
40 years.
Absolutely nothing. Though I would say over a period of time, the glacier, for what it was 76 kilometers long then, may have shrunk a little from the snout. I think a little bit of that has taken place. But over the years, seeing how China is now expansion, that's where it is very important that you see. So Siachen is just not a watchtower, it is also a water tower, because you find that the Chinese want to weaponize water. If it is, that is what the Chinese are looking at. You saw what's happened in Galwan. It's an excellent training ground. It is because the men take pride in serving on the glacier. That's very important. That you feel, yes, I have served on the glacier. I can now withstand the worst of conditions. And that is where you found that at Galwan and Eastern Ladakh, when China did what it did, they were given a befitting reply. Otherwise, it's not easy operating at 20,000, 21,000. You don't know what the Chinese are going to be doing at what time. So to be ready at all times, 24/7, 365 days, to be vigilant, you require to be capable to operate at those great heights. And Siachen is an excellent training ground, and we have prevented Pakistan bluff that they are on Siachen. They are miles away. They're not even anywhere close to the Saltoro ridgeline. But you see, over the years, like you were mentioning, the Pakistanis in 1963, when they gifted Shaksgam Valley to China, which was adjoining the Siachen Glacier. So like what Nitin said, it's like a wedge between Pakistan and China. And that is where it's very important that you continue to occupy, because you can't trust Pakistan. Whatever you might say, it's not possible. Even though for years before the CPEC, the Pakistanis and the Chinese had connived make the Karakoram highway, which came from Khunjara Pass, which was just from the Shaksgam Valley and through Gilgit-Baltistan. So you find that it's a very strategically important, even though we spend almost 5 crores a day. That's the kind of money that we spend. But it's worth it. Absolutely
it's worth it, and it's a strategic imperative. Nitin, I want to ask you about You know, sometime back, about 15 years back, there was a move to get India to withdraw from Siachen, to demilitarize the glacier. The government of the day thought that it could, do this outreach to Pakistan. Can you tell us a bit about that and why something like this would be very difficult in the scenario prevailing now, as General Kulkarni just mentioned?
Well, yes, that was the days of Aman Ki Asha.
Yes.
And at that point in time, decision makers in India and some peace snakes or some people who thought the only way to do a rapprochement with Pakistan would be to pluck two low-hanging fruits, maybe the Sur Creek dispute in Kutch,
yes,
and the Siachen Glacier to be demilitarized.
Right.
Now, that itself, the very premise that Siachen Glacier, you have to withdraw, both sides have to withdraw and demilitarize itself was faulty, in my view, and as General Sanjay Kulkarni will endorse, that the two sides are party to it is what Pakistan says. But actually, Pakistan is not on the Siachen Glacier.
Right.
They are on the much lower ground,
far away,
west of the Saltoro Ridge. They don't even they don't get a look in on the Siachen Glacier, to the Siachen Glacier. So therefore, the very fact that India was deploying its forces on its own land shouldn't have really occurred. I mean, shouldn't have been a case where you say that you withdraw from here and I withdraw from there, and therefore we have a demilitarized zone. So I think that itself was faulty. That was the thinking in the UPA 1 and UPA 2 governments. Yes. Thankfully, I think the army vetoed it. Right. And very sane voices like Pranab Mukherjee supported them at that point in time. And therefore, it didn't happen. But one small anecdote I wanted to add to what Sanjay Kulkarni said about living there on the Siachen Glacier, or what Anthony was saying. In fact, he had told me when I was writing the book that there is a saying in Siachen, पेट में रोटी, हाथ में सोटी. Soti is a stick. Yes. पेट में roti is, of course, you have food in the stomach, you're full. Then you take a lathi in hand and chal choti choti. When you walk there, take very small steps so that you don't overexert yourself because lack of oxygen and the altitude. And I think the Indian soldier has perfected it, which actually helped the deployment in high altitude and super high altitudes of eastern Ladakh over the past 4 years in the standoff with China.
Chal choti choti. That's a good line there.
Absolutely. Why we say that? Because otherwise, until and unless you synchronize your steps with your breathing, you're likely to get tired. Right. So to prevent that, and that is what Nitin said, that was something like a mantra for us, Right. Ki pet mein roti, haath mein soti, chal choti. That's the way, and everybody.
But General Kulkarni, just before the show, we were talking about China's water wars and their strategy to, possibly dam a lot of the waters flowing out of the Tibetan plateau. How does Siachen fit in that? This long game that the Chinese have embarked upon?
See, the Tibetan plateau, which is the, I would say, with the water reservoir, entire Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, everything. You find one of its tributary going to Indus, which is and going and joining the Arabian Sea at Karachi. Right. There you find that it is the Indus is there, and the other one, which is their river, which is unloading at the water at Xinjiang. Yes. Not Xinjiang, Shanghai. So you see from the top, and Chinese can't weaponize water. We've been hearing about it, what they do to Brahmaputra, they do all kinds of. And because obviously, if you have water, you can generate electricity. Yes. And that is where the dams are being constructed. Right. So much that the Chinese may say is run of the, it isn't so. Because you can release the water when you feel like, and thereby putting the lower riparian state into a tremendous amount of problem. Right. So the Chinese can't be trusted, and we have to ensure. You see the Galwan, what happened? Yes. The very fact that from Galwan comes the river Shyok, which joins the river Nubra, which is joining. And both the rivers then go and join Indus at Skardu and from Kapalu. Now, just imagine along the CPEC, which is being constructed now. Yes. So they are now joining Skardu to that. So another about 150 to 200 kilometers, they join from that same highway, CPEC, they join to Skardu. Yes. So you know the intentions of what the Pakis, and Pakis are virtually a stooge now, a satellite state of China. Chinese, they will do what the Chinese tell them to do. Right. In that context, I think it is very essential that there's no question of anybody even recommending that we should vacate. And Benazir is known to be giving bangles to the chief of their army staff, saying that you better wear bangles because you people are not capable of fighting the Indian army. You are only fighting us, the citizens of Pakistan. So there is a lot of undercurrent which is going on in Pakistan also. So I don't think, I go along with you and Nitin, that we can't trust Pakistan. Now all these talks are okay, and they should be left to at that. We have had 21 rounds of co-commander talks with China. You know what's happening. We've had 29 rounds of WMCC with China. You know what's happened. So it's useless. I don't think we should stick to where we are, because we have a tremendous, and anybody in the mountains have a dominating height. From 1984, 13th of April 1984 till date, how many attacks have been launched by Pakistanis? Not one succeeded, even Musharraf himself leading attacks. He's failed. So that be the thing.
Musharraf himself failed, and that was one of those elusive goals that he had, and he's written so in his autobiography as well, that his plans, repeated plans to try and grab Siachen failed. So you just heard from some of the best voices in India's strategic community why Siachen matters. General Sanjay Kulkarni, who personally led the assault on Siachen, Operation Meghdoot 40 years ago. My friend Nitin Gokhale, who's written one of the most authoritative books on Beyond NJ 984, to get a copy of that book if you want to read more about Siachen. And of course, my colleague Anthony Rosario, who's just come back and he's put together this excellent documentary on Siachen 2024, Why It Still Matters. Download the News9 Plus app and watch our exclusive documentary on the Siachen Glacier and why it matters 40 years after the Indian Army captured it.